Hello, everyone. So thank you very much for joining us. We'll let some more people trickle in. But thank you for coming to the webinar. It's evening for me, so good evening to those of you in my time zone. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone else. I'm Zara Hawkins. I'm the Head of Data Culture and Transformation Programs for Looker and at Google Cloud. And I'm going to be running you through hopefully give you some ideas that you'll be able to implement in the next couple of weeks or hit the ground running in January. Just to do some housekeeping, so I have some notes here, so do excuse me looking to the side. We do have a 15-minute Q&A at the end of our presentation, but do kind of ask questions as you go so that you don't forget them, and we'll make sure to kind of answer those either live now or any that we don't get to. We'll make sure to follow up with you directly. The presentation is being recorded, so we'll be sending out the recording after the session today. And the windows you see on your screen, they're all customizable, so you can minimize them, maximize them, move them around the screen, whatever makes sense for you. And if you accidentally minimize or close a window, don't worry, you can just click on the toolbar and it should bring everything back up. So looks like we've got a lot more people that have joined, so let's just get into, hopefully we'll get some good questions at the end as well. So like I say, please do ask them as we go through so that you don't forget any questions that you might have. As with all buzzwords, data culture has been mixed up with everything and it's really lost its meaning. I recognise not everyone did Latin at school. I went to a very old school English institution is probably the best word to call it. But sometimes it is easiest to go right back to the root of the word, particularly when it's been overused and misused. So a company culture, it's not defined by how quickly your company adopts a tool or a service or a new process, but it will be a very good indicator of how a tool is adopted if there were no external forces at play. So I want to do an exercise with you first of all. I want you to think of your previous company, so not the company that you're at now, just to save any potential issues, but think of your previous company and think of a time, a long time ago, when you would go into an office space. What was it like? You know, if you're sort of looking around, were there, boxes for more junior people to sit on, perching, their laptops on their knee? And then the fanciest Herman Miller reclining chair for leadership in their separate, glamorous offices? Or was it, an open culture? Everyone sat everywhere. There was no notion of kind of that corner office or the window office. Leadership were all sat there. Then what were the norms or values that company had? Things that are written in your handbook is one thing, your employee handbook. Maybe you signed it for your employment contract. There are things there that sometimes companies include. And then what are the things that just happened? So not written in any contract, anything like that. What are those things? Because those are the really important ones. And mostly people tend to recognize what norms and values are when they're actually violated. So things like, some companies, there is that unspoken rule that you don't leave the office until any time after 6 o'clock in the evening. Even if you're actually just on Facebook or something for the last hour, it's just that kind of unspoken rule that no one leaves the office until after 6 o'clock. Thinking of those things, that everything together is what builds a culture, an organizational culture. So obviously many of us are not working in offices anymore, but do think about those things and what rules even now still apply whilst we're working remotely. What cultural norms have maybe built up in that time that we've been, remote? Are there any norms, values that have transcended from the office to the home office? Are there any kind of new rules and regulations that were literally put in place for that? So having things like, lots of people had to all of a sudden have a half-an-hour meeting every day at 9 o'clock in the morning with their cameras on, I think to make sure that they weren't in their pajamas or something like that. So think about these things. Now, hold on to those thoughts for a little bit later, because we're going to come back to organizational culture and changing organizational culture. So let's crystallize what we're really talking about when we say data culture. I always encourage clients and colleagues to call it a data-driven culture, just until the kind of meaning is really embedded in what you're talking about, the correct meaning. Is data held in high regard? Does everyone have access to the right data? Business decisions made off the back of using data critically at all levels of the business, in every department, in every location, all those sort of things, everything that has been, those points that are raised in the amazing ebook that's just been released. All of those things are synonymous of a data-driven culture. And these are only a few of those norms and values that a data-driven business will exhibit. So what about understanding the nuances of data? Because that's something entirely separate. Data literacy, another kind of buzzword in the data world at the moment. A really quick Google search, you don't have to use Google, you can use any internet browser of choice. It brought up 16 different definitions of data literacy just on that first page. But there were some really common themes. So in short, data literacy, the easiest way to think about it is the ability to read, understand, and communicate through the use of data. For some, and likely a really large part of your organization, data is a new language. So it can be daunting, and just as learning a new language, it's a process and often a slow one. So think of when you had to learn a language at school. So it wasn't just words, it was tenses, nouns, structures, pronouns, and the way that you kind of formulate the difference of how you speak versus how you write about something. So all of those things apply to data. So it really is a language in itself. Data literacy is a key component of data culture, and ultimately it's what drives that development of a data culture or a data-driven culture within an organization. The easiest way to do that is data experiences. They're meant to make using data the default option for everyone by, using embeds, integrations, workflows, different applications, dashboards, all that sort of thing. Seeing and using data every day in everything that someone is doing is what can really help enable, at an organizational level, it can help everyone build skills in reading, understanding, and communicating through the use of data. The more these two things can work hand in hand, the more efficient your organization will be at moving towards truly being a data-driven organization. There are so many different learning styles, the way people take in information, and again, putting things in context for people, making it unavoidable. It really is just, like I say, the most efficient way to get people going on that journey. You want to provide pathways for everyone. So let's go back to that analogy of data being a new language for some people. So when you learn a new language, you start with the basics. You learn certain words, certain phrases, and then you build up to reading, understanding, communicating in that language. When someone's really fluent, they can argue in that language. There are so much, there's just a different level of things that people can communicate effectively with that level of fluency. When you put that in data terms, and when it comes to being data literate, again, you're not just going to throw a massive textbook at someone and assume that they'll be more than comfortable just reading through it and then reeling off those thoughts to you. You want everyone in your business speaking the same language, albeit at varying levels, and that's absolutely fine. You have to start somewhere. So it's a good idea to understand where people's data literacy starting point is. You can do just a really quick survey. It shouldn't be anything kind of massive, just so you can get an understanding of your starting points. This will help you build the relevant materials and enablement for those different groups of people, and making that path to entry far more seamless. And again, the important thing here is really about having that pathway for everyone so that there's not that anxiety and learning anxiety, which can be incredibly debilitating to an individual, but also create a lot of friction in that pathway to becoming a more data-driven organization. A common assumption, which I've come across a lot, is that it's easier to focus on those who are already working with data, and or if they have above average skills with data. So with this approach, you're widening the gap between the analysts and the end users, and you're actually increasing the reliance on your analysts for those day-to-day analytics or those day-to-day business decisions that do need to be made on data. You're creating that bottleneck. But actually what you're also doing is you're taking them away from the more complex strategic analysis. Important because you've got those different levels of analytical maturity, and I think what is also overlooked is that by creating this bottleneck, by not having that kind of self-serve environment when it comes to data and not having that data-driven culture, you are also restricting your analysts from making those transformational business decisions on behalf of the whole organization. If you can improve everyone in the business's data literacy score just by 1 point, then your mean data literacy will be higher than if you just invest in that already data-savvy group. And again, that void can already be large, and that can already be just in itself. So getting everyone, like I say, to a point where at least there is some understanding of the language that is being spoken. It's really key to uplift individuals as well. So really kind of looking at that change management piece here. Again, just like learning a language, you don't want to kickstart learning anxiety by introducing concepts and terminology like causation, correlation, all that kind of stuff. That can all come later. You want simple terminology, you want simple concepts. You just need them to have what they need to be able to effectively get promoted or, complete what they need to do in a day. And you want to make their life easier. Just tools that they can apply to use that newfound knowledge, give them that confidence. For those that are already familiar with data as a language, just provide a continuous learning journey so they can continue to up-level themselves as well. It's not about just bringing that group with the kind of lower data literacy up and hindering everyone else. You want there to be continuous learning paths that people can kind of move between as they kind of improve and move at that data literacy level. Of course, again, using technology, those data experiences are so impactful when they're done right. And we'll talk about a good way to approach that shortly. But first and foremost, cultural change is seriously hard. A data tool or even a data literacy program on an organization and hope for the best. There is a ton to consider. So here we are talking about both culture, key component of data literacy. Everyone knows that the best way to learn a new language is to completely immerse yourself in the culture. So it's exactly the same for data. Incorporate data into key workflows. You want to really cultivate an environment where using data is the easiest option and really the only option. You don't want it to be a hindrance. So things like making sure that the data is hygienic, actionable, performant, all of that has to be done because your technology choices will be imperative to success. If someone goes to run a query or from an end user perspective, ask a question of the data, they get something back, they report that to their, leadership team and it's wrong, that's going to be very difficult to get that person to trust data. So all of that has to go into, has to be considered to make sure that, people are using trustworthy data, they have confidence in the data, and like I say, making sure that it's unavoidable. Have a think about just incorporating data into your workflows. So what tools do you use every day? And if you use something like Confluence or an internal portal, anything like that, just embedding those dashboards so that if it's the first thing they load up in the morning, it's the first thing that they're looking at. I know I've had lots of clients in the past that will say, the first thing that they do is they open their inbox. But the first thing they do is they look through those scheduled reports so that they know exactly what they need to kind of get done in their day, the things that they need to achieve, the things that aren't going to be achievable, all from the data that is right there in their inbox at 9 a.m. If you can take data to where people already are, you really are 10 steps ahead. And it should spark curiosity. And as people stumble upon data, they need to have the ability to explore deeper for their specific needs. So having that ability to drill down and ask further questions of the data is a really good way to encourage curiosity, but also, again, like we say, build that data literacy in a context that they know. So, as always, change involves change management. This is something that I harp on about relentlessly and is probably incredibly dull to clients that I used to manage. But changing gears a little bit here, fundamentally, what we're talking about is an org-wide change. So an organizational, cultural change. We're taking everyone in the organization from their current state and we're wanting to move them into a desired state, a data literate state, a state where everyone is using data to make decisions, to hold conversations with, to challenge, those decisions as well that some people are making and everything else. Change management, don't forget, is the people side of change. It's not the process, it's not the tool, it's not the systems, the enablement plans. It is the people side. So although you have to rely on your tools to make change as easy as possible, and like we said before, it's imperative that your tech stack supports that, it's a human, and they are human. The people you're changing are individuals. They have concerns, they have emotions. Work isn't their life. They have different learning styles, experiences, backgrounds, and anxieties, and all of that needs to be considered, not necessarily by you as an individual, nor their leaders, but there should be someone in an organization, particularly when you're doing something like this at scale, that is aware of, at a high level, what those things could be. All of that means, people need the time and space to change. I did a presentation just a couple of weeks ago, and the most common question was, how long will it take to get a data-driven organization? It's not the case of switching on a light and everyone's on board. It will take time, and I think that having that as having that as a grounding for your understanding is also kind of healthy for you and anyone else that's working on this change. For some, it's years, but equally, it's never done. You want to continue to iterate. It will continue to evolve. And that's why, again, understanding what the change management piece is to support that is incredibly important. So in order to effectively change those processes, the enablement plans, all that sort of thing, you have to be building an end product that provides a solution for your customers or your end users, and not building something that you think they need. What that means then is, you know what they need. It helps you to kind of build your communication plans. It helps to create alignment with vision statements, all these things that we'll talk about shortly. There we go. So a number of things obviously are a part of, I just realised the presentation might be slightly shrunk for you, so I am sorry if that's frustrating. But lots of different elements of change management, and I definitely understand that it's always easiest to dive straight into the technology, particularly if you've just bought something like Looker and you're just really keen to start modelling away, slap an Explorer on top, then a dashboard, farm it out and hope for the best. But one of the biggest mistakes I've seen, both, in 300 people companies to 15,000 people companies, is doing exactly that. Building what you think people need, replacing what is already there, but just something new and shiny. That's when I see these projects fail, and the transformation just doesn't happen. There is a huge amount of technical debt that comes with that method due to the changes that you inevitably have to make once your users have logged in and have never returned. You're paying for something that people aren't using because it's of no value to them. It is not driving the outcomes they have to drive. Arguably more straightforward to change the way a system works than to change the way a human works. But if our goal is to make using data the easiest option for everyone when making business decisions, then we have to be very clear on what's valuable to our customers. The journey from a user perspective, it's not linear. So much like that change curve, if you can kind of keep that image in your head, people will oscillate between the different phases. There are different levers that you can pull. But even with these four things that are, like I say, they probably are, or I imagine they're very straightforward, but often they are the four main themes that people really overlook. So being able to put some plans around these four work streams, it'll give you a springboard, hopefully that you can go away and sort of research and build some plans and see how it fits for your company and your organization. What you'll also find is these work streams tend to inform one another. So again, it's not linear. You don't do one and then the next. They'll all be moving sort of at the same time, albeit at different speeds. The context that you get from these different work streams, you'll uncover things that you hadn't anticipated, but you'll be able to kind of fall back on that plan. So like I say, the planning phase, as has been outlined in the ebook, is incredibly important. Remember, they're not stakes in the ground, so they will evolve. They'll take on different shapes as the journey goes on, and I'd be concerned if they didn't, to be quite honest. But it's always good to have a template so you can record what's worked well, what didn't work so well. And like I say, just they're not static, and don't be put down by that. You'll kind of figure out off on a slight diversion, which may feel like a longer journey, but it ends up sort of solidifying some of that context later on. I'm trying very hard not to talk about dog training here because after recently getting another puppy, there are just so many similarities in the way that what might feel like the longer path actually in context embeds these behaviors and changes behaviors far better, and I guess in a stickier way in the long run. So having these 4 things fleshed out before you even give a login to anyone outside of your kind of data engineering team or your analytical team, it ensures a considered start, and it also gives you the ability to have realistic timelines that you can communicate to the organization and clear outcomes. So vision, again, vision statements, it's sort of a thing of my, I think vision statements are fascinating because typically they're anything but vision statements. They're usually kind of these paragraph long things that make no sense to really anyone other than the person that insisted on, on that vision statement. The purpose of a vision statement, and I'm sure you all know this, but again, it's just one of those things that does tend to be forgotten or overlooked. The purpose of a vision statement is so that you have clarity in change. And actually what it does from a mental perspective, it encourages those feelings of security. So when we're running that risk of running into learning anxieties, that kind of frustration, again, those sort of dips in that change curve, having clarity in something that is communicated at all levels by anyone in an organization will help kind of, set the groundwork. There shouldn't be any underlying message, and it really does have to be understood by everyone. And also I tell clients it's good in a sense that it keeps everyone accountable along the way as well. Trust is a really big part in the emotional process of change. So like I say, underlying messages are going to really kind of debase that. Lean on your stakeholders and your change agents to shape that vision statement. So kind of give it a trial run. Do take on that feedback because it's, again, surprisingly overlooked that it really does have to be understood by everyone in the organization. It doesn't matter what level they're at, where they're based regionally, what department they're in. It needs to be understood. So like I say, work with your stakeholders, work with your change agents, and try it out with them before you sort of go live and make any iterations as you go. Stakeholders. I tend to find that customers think that you sort of pick your champions or your data ambassadors and that's your kind of group of stakeholders and it's static. Again, it shouldn't be like that for your sake, but also for your stakeholders, because they probably don't want to be assigned to a project maybe for, the foreseeable future. Who knows? But in large scale rollouts, stakeholders are truly indispensable. Really strong relationships are required, not necessarily through you, but before the rollout, you want to ensure that there is open communication. So bear in mind that any stakeholders that you do have, they also need to be supported. So note their experiences. When I say experiences, like have they gone through any changes in the recent past? Was there anything negative about that? That will also give you an indication into any sort of microclimates, which are effectively culture, but on a smaller, kind of more individual level. And also it helps you understand what their concerns might be so that you can build trust, but also be very kind of aware of how you're communicating, anything that you need to kind of bake into any communications that you're sending out to those specific teams. So you'll want to leverage that information. Also for training strategies, it's really, really helpful to bake in a simplified way of knowing who your stakeholders are at any one time. I really like the radar format just because I'm a visual person, but also supplementing that with a spreadsheet or a Google Sheet if you use Google products, just so you can keep you can keep track of who you're engaging or who is being engaged as a stakeholder, what their power and influence is, their interest in the change, when they were engaged to be a stakeholder, and also at what point you would expect them to kind of roll off, because people will move into different parts of the radar itself, but they will also drop off altogether, potentially come back at a later point. You want to get a rounded view, and if you're doing this at scale, you can't do that by just having, 10 static individuals throughout the whole project. Change agents, again, lots of different terminology that one could use, but typically there will be nuances, and I think I mentioned this earlier, that you just didn't anticipate, and there'll be challenges that you just never expected. 9 times out of 10, you'll find out about these from a change agent, or it'll sort of make its way up to you via the change agent network and then stakeholders and so forth. So super, super important. Again, your change agent should be someone on the ground, in the weeds. I do apologize if you can hear my dog trying to break in. I also encourage them to own a part of the training piece for their specific team, for their area. They know what methods will work. They know the workload that is kind of already there in the department. But also what terminology makes the most sense. Again, it's all about reducing the learning anxiety, understanding what motivates people, and understanding, what isn't going to scare people off from using a tool. The other good thing is if they know it's built by a colleague or someone that's been involved, there is that sort of affinity to help them out or try and engage and give them that time as well, rather than some sort of person they've never heard of with a title that scares the living daylights out of them. It creates another feedback loop that you may not have. So what is working in the training, what's not? Is it too long? Does it not make sense? And just understanding their day-to-day. So I can't emphasize enough how important, again, prior to sort of launching or rolling out, whether it's your data literacy program or a new data tool, a new end product for your users, having these sort of change agents also mapped out is super important. Having at least one person on the ground per department that can break down those silos and communicate to the team in, a language that is understood by those individuals. Having those testing, like the pre-release, all that sort of stuff run through them. Again, the vision statement, feedback that you otherwise wouldn't get. And it's typically the most honest feedback, which you can bake into training, communications, and so on and so forth. So again, really skimming the surface here, but in my experience, again, communication is massively overlooked. It's also misunderstood. An email, yes, it's a form of communication, but it only works in certain situations for certain types of communication. Again, having a rough outline of your communication plan throughout the kind of project, and you can roll this kind of every 3 months, you update it or whatever. You don't have to do some mammoth communication plan, but it will provide you with anchors for your messaging. And particularly if at any point things get overwhelming or, hopefully there's not an uprising of any sorts, but having an idea of what types of messaging that you can set when people are in, particular parts of that change curve. So, for example, if they're in that sort of low phase, why are we doing this, that denial, that's when you want to sort of spark curiosity and show them sort of interesting and fun things that they couldn't do before. And having that template, just even kind of linked from a simple spreadsheet, owner of the content, who needs to send it, the recipients, and the desired outcomes of that content and medium is going to really help you. It's really good practice to note the type of communication so that you do have a visual of how much you're depending on one medium and how much email is always the worst contender. And again, it's a one-way communication. So what else can you use in the organization? Again, it has to be part of the norm. So if it's Slack or something like that, that's great. hosting workshops, office hours, all of those things to just kind of keep communication going. It's super, super important. You always want to maintain a people-first approach. So bake in messages from the ground, like I said, probably from those change agents that are working with you or even stakeholders, and use them to reduce those anxieties as well. So the majority of the comms pre-rollout do actually tend to be around building your network, so building that change agent network, building your stakeholder network, and getting people excited. And you'll be very grateful when you've got sort of thousands of people that are starting to move into that denial phase of the change curve, and you've already got a template for communication to sort of re-inspire and motivate them. So many benefits of having this kind of people-first approach, and really putting some of these things into practice, like I say, before your users even receive a login to whatever tool that you might use. It does mean that you'll be more deliberate with your resources and, of course, more efficient, and to an extent mitigating that people side of change, which is, it can be the difference really between you achieving that coveted data-driven culture or failing. And, that's kind of aside from whatever the tech stack is that you are using. So I will wrap up there. We did fly through, but I've seen some questions coming through, so we'll go through those. Let's have a look. So do bear with me whilst I open. Okay, so one of the questions, what would you recommend to include in a survey to determine this data literacy starting point? So there are tons of really good resources around, the types of questions that you ask, and also the kind of length and things like that. Fundamentally, you want it to be really a one-stop shop. So it doesn't matter how literate someone is, or not data literate. I don't want to say illiterate. You want it to be quick and sharp, and something that you can roll out every sort of quarter or 6 months, pardon me, to check if that's improving. So a really good, I think, starting question is, how comfortable are you using data or using metrics or using numbers, if you want to kind of really make sure that the language is understood, when discussing a business change or changing direction in your business. Having people say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are they? I think that's a really good indicator of how confident people will be in using the data that you're giving them access to. So anything around, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you in using data today in your interactions with leadership? How... I've actually got a list of these I recently shared with a colleague to give to a customer, but anything around, on a scale of 1 to 10, it's kind of the easiest thing, just as an example. How many times do you kind of leverage data in a week, or how many times do you find that data is coming up? It's actually a terrible question, and I'm just kind of rambling because I can see more questions coming through. Anything around, on a scale of 1 to 10, what do you feel is the importance of data in your role? Can you access data? If someone was to say causation to you, would you understand? Just things like that give you that template. And some people do it as a score of like 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 5. There's also actually some really good free tools that you can take a look at to get inspiration on questions as well. The important part is making it understood by the people in your organization with content and context that they use. Okay, so How thorough is Looker's training for new clients? I've worked with data a lot before, but I'm a bit rusty, so I know it will take some time to get comfortable with it again. So I used to be a customer success manager for nearly 4 years with Looker, and the training I found was brilliant. And I know that sounds obviously very biased, but so I'm really big on understanding what people's learning styles are. If you are someone that, without going into the terms, if you like to actually kind of experience something or try something in the application, then there is an environment for you to do that. If you prefer to read and digest, there is documentation for you to do that. Lots of webinars and things like that. There's also a really good user guide that is a brilliant kind of starting point, because it effectively takes you through the journey of how to view a dashboard, how to create a dashboard, how to model for and explore, how to set up admin. So there's a really good path there, and I don't know if we can sort of send any of those links over at any point, but yeah, go to the user guide, and the resources there are brilliant. Okay. We have another question here. So how do you put the change management process in place for capturing clean data and knowing how to use the data? Okay, there's a lot of questions in this question. How do you get buy-in for creating a data literate Right, so I'm going to do the first part. How do you put the change management process in place for capturing clean data and knowing how to use the data? So I would actually call that a technical change process. Again, there has to be a pain there. So if you have an exposure to bad data, that's the pain. This is bad data because we haven't done this at the beginning of the funnel or something like that. So I always think having a skeleton of what that should look like, the issues that it will resolve, tying everything to an outcome is what helps people understand. The change management piece is more around, this is the process that we need to have. We need to have this because we're not making good decisions, because we're making decisions based on bad data. And that's kind of the communication piece. And, stakeholders that are communicating on the ground, like that's the kind of change management. It's getting the people to understand why that change has to happen, why you're doing it. A really good way, I actually wrote a blog post last year, particularly for sort of end users that have low data literacy. It's a little bit tedious, but a really good way to show them the impact of bad data is to get them to input. It can be sort of Fitbit data, number of mince pies consumed. Americans don't have mince pies. Google English mince pie and you'll know what I mean. Candy canes, something like that, and have people input the data and then create a visualization. And you'll see that not everyone does it regularly. It's inaccurate, and they'll be able to see that quite easily on the, whatever visualization you choose. So you're also using, there's so many good examples around COVID and bad data and not thinking about things critically that you can also use to help kind of impart that message. I'm going to move on to another question because there's so many questions within that one question, but I can work with marketing to answer the rest of that as well. Another question. So what are good incentives to encourage a user to use data more, such as swag, awards, etc.? I feel like people are shy about their data use and don't always want their work promoted, and it could become a disincentive. That's such a brilliant question. And actually, particularly what you say at the end about some things actually not being incentivizing at all is massively overlooked. So I've always said, and I realize how juvenile this sounds, even adults love a sticker. Adults love an award, a sticker, anything like that. But if you do have people, and again, this is where change agents are great, asking your change agents on the ground, what is the culture? Do people want to be walking around with a badge that says, I'm brilliant at Looker? Or do they want to have their work promoted? I'd love to share this dashboard that they created because of the impact it could have on everyone else if they adopted this dashboard. Asking your change agents. The other thing is, people can feel awkward depending on who is giving that kind of commendation or who is promoting. Again, change agents are going to be your best people to ask if it's individuals specifically. The other thing that you can do is encourage people to share their work. Slack has always been a really good place for communities to kind of do that. And typically what you do find is that people will become more confident in sharing something if other people are doing it. But of course, there will always be people that actually that's kind of more daunting to them. The other thing, so depending on the literacy level, and it sounds like you're talking about people with a slightly lower literacy level, you can still do sort of fun things. So depending on what you consider fun, I think it's fun. So there's some amazing free data sources out there, and I'm sure there'll be some on COVID. There already is. And what you can do is just kind of put little nuggets. So sort of testing people, it can be interactive or they can do it by themselves. And then at the end of that, depending on what their score is, you can send them some swag individually. So it's not sort of a public thing. It's just kind of an exercise, but it's a fun exercise. But at the same time, you're actually also teaching them about the importance of thinking critically about data or using a tool. A really popular one that we do at Looker for new starters is actually on the data from airfields and kind of air accidents, things like that. And you're given questions and you have to get the answers to them. Just things like that. Scavenger hunts are a really good way that aren't sort of those public incentives. Does Looker work well with adult Apple products, or is it strictly for PC users? So Looker is web-based, so you can use anything you want. You can use your phone, tablet, computer, Mac. It's kind of Google what you need, but it's kind of irrelevant of your hardware. Okay, so someone had a previous question that is also sharing a similar analogy, so I'm going to share that. I have a similar analogy regarding data culture. Most data teams are like private chefs for executives and do not help the majority of employees. To have a data-driven culture, you need to have an employee cafeteria so they can get the data that they need. It may not be able to answer all the possible questions, but it should be good enough for them to do their job. That is fantastic, Anna. I'm going to copy and paste that. It's completely true. And really what you're doing at the very beginning is, like I say, you're sparking that curiosity. For me, a win is when you can see that an end user that has no background in data has been taken to a dashboard, whether it's through, it's been sent to their inbox, or it's in a tool that they use on every day, and they just drill down one layer deeper. That's a win because they have shown curiosity, they're interested, and you're potentially giving them a view that they've not had before. So all of that is incredibly encouraging. Okay, are there any additional resources apart from the resources on the Looker website for preparing for Looker certification exams? I would say, so for me, when I was studying for the Looker certification, again, it's all based on learning style. I actually found the best thing. So I used the resources that you have. We didn't get given anything different. And I used those as a springboard to go and do things in the application. So there were some things that I was a bit rusty on, like map visualizations and errors and things like that, because I've always had customers really that were predominantly EMEA based. So just playing around with different scenarios there is personally what I found really helpful. I think the idea of the certification is that you have a well-rounded understanding of Looker as a tool and less about testing, like, can you pass a test? It's not there to kind of catch you out. So I would say do use the resources, but use that as a springboard to try and engage in whatever learning style you have. Also, buddy groups are really helpful. So we have other customers that, are getting sort of hundreds of people tested all at one time, and they form little buddy groups, kind of sharing questions, coming up with different things that can help them. So like filtering, using different types of filters to see what the output is and when you might use one type of filter versus another, particularly on dates. And I'm going to stop talking in case I give more away in terms of what kind of questions you can expect. Okay, another question. What are the main indicators that a company should move to a more structured order of collecting and sharing data that will enhance the data operations and data culture of the organization? So I would say pretty much at a very high level, it all comes down to what we were talking about at the beginning with that example of what are the norms and values. If you are kind of experiencing kind of clashes between different teams, a really good example, and forgive me if this is kind of massively overgeneralizing, but I've had this with a couple of different e-commerce clients. There's always that argument between, your direct marketing and your email marketing team, and who drove that purchase. So having typically that's a symptom of not having governance in, across your business terms and your business metrics. But that's kind of the thing that norm that you tend to see, that kind of always there's a clash and a meeting around who owns what, or which metric was actually driven by what team. Having people that are really just making decisions off the back of gut feel. For anyone that's a sailor, I'm making myself sound very English. My dad always taught me, the whole lick your finger and put it in the air to see which way the wind direction the wind is blowing from, rather than looking at, the data source, the windcock at the top. So it's just things like that. How did you come to that understanding? What data did you use? And you don't want to be that person that's like, oh, show me the data. It's a conversation. So again, if you're hearing conversations just always being shut down, that's an indicator that there needs to be more structure around what data is collected and for what reason. Someone saying, oh, I don't have the data to that, or a really good, again, you get it a lot in e-commerce companies, that's my data and I'm not sharing it with them. That's a really good indicator that, again, there's a lack of governance, there's probably a lack of trust. There needs to be some kind of synergy between the different teams. So we have another question. What kind of user metrics are available to review aggregate adoption? Are there signals or traits to indicate that a user is learning, developing, ramp maybe, leveraging the platform instead of just poking around? It's a great question. So if you're talking about Looker specifically, if you log into the admin section, there is a system activity kind of portal which is fantastic. And when I was a CSM, it was one of my favorite things to look in. What you can do is you can write further queries there, or kind of ask further questions of the data around, okay, well, how many people are logging in once and then never logging in again? If I have built an Explore and I've actually just not asked, say, the marketing team what they need, but I've built an Explore, I've put a dashboard on top of it, and I've released it to the marketing team, but actually I can see that there are no views on that dashboard, or very specifically, which fields are being used in the Explores to create more analysis. If you have fields that haven't been used in sort of 30 days or 60 days, it's very likely that it's because it just doesn't resonate or it's not required. So you can see things like that, or you can build your own queries based on the kind of system activity data. But key things I would say are people logging in and not returning, the kind of usage metrics on your dimensions and measures, because again, that shows you what's helpful, what's not helpful. The other thing is also not falling into the trap of, oh, that person's using it a lot, they're spending lots of minutes on it or whatever else, so they're doing well. Sometimes, depending on other data sources that you're looking at, or other user events that you're looking at, it can actually be a sign of they're really struggling and actually they're spending too much time in Looker. So again, if you have those sort of more technical stakeholders that are also looking, or analysts that are also looking at their specific team metrics, it's a really good way to spark conversation. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea. The other thing, there are lots of things that you can do, but also having workshops, office hours. Are people turning up to the office hours? Are they not? That would kind of suggest to me, whether they're engaged or not. So a couple of minutes, I'll try and get this question in. What are some strategies a team can implement when the larger challenge against data culture for an organization is the technology and infrastructure, such as isolated data, different storage providers, and that is difficult to aggregate and streamline? So let me just make sure I understood the question. Strategies a team can implement when the larger challenge against data culture for an organization is the technology and infrastructure. Okay, so like we said, the kind of data experiences really help drive a data culture. If people are not able to get the data, or, access is an issue, you can't drive a data culture. No one can do that. So again, what I said, I think at the beginning, and I do genuinely believe this for so many scenarios, if you can tie a pain to an outcome, or you can solve that problem, that's the kind of way to get the feet moving to where you need to go. There are also different types of change levers that you can pull. So there are it sounds so brutal, but things like the survival lever. If we don't make these changes, we will fail as a business. Or, our competitor is, here and we are not, because we are unable to provide data to the organization, or we're making decisions in silos. So using that kind of communication, again, you have to be very strategic and very careful. It's very dependent on the organizational culture at the moment. The mistake that sometimes people make is they kind of bring in all of these third parties to kind of sell the platform. But actually, what you're saying here is, there's resistance to that potentially, or, there's cultural things there. But again, if you can tie it to an outcome, if you can show almost like a little POC that makes sense, that's sometimes a good way to get people thinking in the way that you need to. Again, having a vision statement. So why is it that you need to do that? Creating alignment. I can talk about this all day, but I've just realized we are out of time. If you do have any questions, or I didn't get to answer your question, please do send them through, and we'll endeavour to get you some answers to those. And thank you so much for taking the time to be here, and have a wonderful holiday. Thank you.